A big crack that could have failed at any time. That trailer with 25 tonnes of rocks in it had been in the steep and winding Whangamoa saddle the day before. These failures sparked an investigation into certifying engineer Peter Wasney of Nelson, his suspension last year, and a month ago the official order to have all 1,500 truck trailers he'd signed off recertified. That is causing a logjam that's worst in Nelson Marlborough and on the west coast. Engineer Lance Hope of Richmond is bearing most of the load. He wouldn't speak on tape, but says he has 100 trailers due to undergo a design review, which is the best indication of whether there's any steel fatigue and is the final step towards recertification. But he hasn't yet done the first step, an initial inspection, on another 100 plus truck trailers. Kevin Barclay, who heads the Heavy Vehicle Certifying Engineers Industry Group, is keen to point out that even this initial inspection stage can catch weaknesses.
They can recognise immediately if one is likely to be insufficient or dangerous in any way. You get familiar with these items and you just know what looks right and what doesn't. Plates too thin, not enough bolts, a whole lot of factors that would be obvious.
Lance Hope thinks recertifying all the Wasney trailers could take 2 years. The only other heavy vehicle certifier in the region, David Plum of Nelson, has been avoiding the worst of the pressure so far.
It will take a wee while to get those sorted, but there's a bit of a policy in place to look for any specific damage to start with, and then all those ones will be pulled first. Then anything that appears to be in reasonable condition will certainly be tracked down and looked at as it goes along.
The Transport Agency has called in another certifier from Canterbury, but he'll only be able to cover Blenheim and the West Coast for a few days each month, beginning after Easter. Malcolm Edridge doesn't even own any other Peter Wasney certified trailers, but he's still caught up in the jam.
Got a new service truck needing certification for a little crane to go on it, and I've got 2 new trucks about to turn up that'll need certified drawbars and headboards, and it's an issue. I've had a truck waiting for 3 months to get design done, and we're still no further ahead.
Only 50 or so engineers nationwide are allowed to certify truck towing connections, and Kelvin Barclay says most are very, very busy, with matters complicated by a second safety alert issued last month about cracks found in refrigerated semi-trailer towing connections. Some industry players are now questioning if the Transport Agency's auditing of certifying engineers is good enough. RNZ has asked the agency to release reports into why the 2 trailers in Nelson Marlborough failed. Mō hōtaka o te Atanei, ko Phil Pennington, aho.
It's 14 minutes to 8 now, and lots of you have been getting in touch with us about Air New Zealand. It's really one-way traffic on this. Adrian's been in touch saying, why is the boss of Air New Zealand primarily concerned with delivering unearned income to shareholders than serving the citizens of the country whose name is emblazoned on the side of the aircraft? Shouldn't the name of the airline therefore be changed? This one in from Gerald in Wellington. Saying, shouldn't Air New Zealand ignore its obligations to minority shareholders just so that it can push smaller airlines off regional routes? And Alistair says, Whangarei has been terribly affected by Air New Zealand. Well done, Shane Jones, he says, for bringing them to account.
Another texter says if the Air New Zealand board warns the government Air New Zealand is commercially independent, why did they need the government to bail them out financially? And another says if you believe that Air New Zealand isn't getting a whole heap of something for Obama's junket to play golf with Key, you are incredibly gullible. It's 13 minutes to 8. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is in French police custody amid accusations he received €50 million for his 2007 election campaign from the late Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. The case also involves a former minister who's been questioned and a former aide who's fighting extradition to France. Police have been investigating alleged financial irregularities in the 2007 political campaign. Hugh Schofield's in Paris and told me a short while ago that Mr Sarkozy may appear before a judge but has not yet been charged.
He's in a place called Nanterre, which is just to the west of central Paris, where there is a police station which is the headquarters of the branch of the police that looks into this kind of financial corruption allegation. And that's where he is and where he may well be for another, 24, 36 hours, because the police have 2 days in which they can hold him. I hasten to say that he went there voluntarily, but he was told to turn up. You know, he was told he was being summoned, and he came, and now they do have the power to hold him and to put the squeeze on him by making him sleep there overnight and, continuing their interrogation.
There's been a few corruption cases against him. What is this one specifically about?
I think this one takes it into new territory. I mean, there have been a series of cases swirling around him, most of which sort of lose your average punter because they're very, very complex and they can't really get to grips with what's what. This one is slightly different because it is the claim that he accepted up to 50 million euros back in 2007 for his election campaign, and not from anywhere, but from Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. Now, if this is substantiated, it is an enormous case to answer and would cast a huge shadow over his legacy and would also open up questions about the whole war in Libya in 2011, which, of course, Sarkozy was instrumental in leading the Franco-British bombing campaign, which led eventually to the fall of Colonel Gaddafi. I hasten to say all this is in the realm of accusation, and the denials are vehement from Sarkozy and his camp. But still, what's happened today is proof that the judges or the police, as they investigating this matter, believe that they have evidence accumulating to the point where they need to really ask him some very tough questions.
He doesn't appear to be in this one on his own, does he? There's a few other interesting characters been involved along the way.
Well, the whole thing reads like a thriller. I mean, you know, it's sort of maybe a fictionalized thriller, but still a thriller, peopled by all sorts of characters. I mean, the key figures are all these middlemen, these sort of shady figures who act as go-betweens, allegedly, between Western governments and Middle Eastern potentates or African potentates who happen to have an awful lot of money. Obviously, you know, the argument is that when a Westerner needs this money, he doesn't go himself, he arranges it, and it tends to be done through these rather shady characters who are the source now of the allegations against Sarkozy. But his counterclaim would be then the very fact that they are these shady middlemen makes them unreliable. So, you know, that's his counter-argument. So there's that, and then there are people in his entourage who've also come under a suspicion in all of this, in particular his former chief of staff at the Élysée Palace, a man called Claude Guéant, who has actually been charged in all of this because it's alleged he received money somehow from sources unknown, but probably linked to this Libyan connection, and used it to buy a flat. Again, something he completely denies. But in that case, the charges have gone much further, and he is now under formal investigation, which I hasten to say Sarkozy is not, though maybe that's edging closer.
That's Hugh Schofield in Paris, 8:09.
The Environmental Protection Authority was warned the behaviour of its chief scientist was damaging trust in the organisation shortly before she resigned. New documents obtained by RNZ News show the Prime Minister's chief science advisor and the Environment Ministry felt Jacqueline Roworth's public statements were undermining the EPA's credibility, and the government was demanding answers from the EPA too. Political reporter Benedict Collins with more.
When Dr. Jacqueline Roworth resigned last month as the Environmental Protection Authority's chief scientist, she'd been in the role for just 15 months. Dr. Roworth's appointment in 2016 was contentious from the outset, with scientists criticising her for suggesting the Waikato River was in the top 5 cleanest in the world. And she infuriated environmentalists and annoyed the government when she described irrigation as a great boon to the environment. Sir Peter Gluckman, the Prime Minister's chief science advisor, says many of Dr. Roworth's comments were inappropriate for a regulator.
And these kind of statements were undermining trust in the regulator. There were also the issues of just the statements around how, just the general way she approached commentary on these sensitive issues.
In December, Sir Peter took his concerns directly to the EPA's chief executive, Alan Freeth.
Alan just indicated to me that he was aware of the concerns that were held both within my office and elsewhere in the Ministry of Environment, that he had addressed them in a constructive way and that he would be looking in due course for a new person in that role.
Emails obtained under the Official Information Act show the Environment Ministry's chief executive, Vicky Robertson, also contacted the EPA and the Associate Environment Minister with her concerns about Dr. Roworth. Ms Robertson refused to be interviewed yesterday, but it's clear from her email she was alarmed at Dr Rowath's conduct.
As we have discussed before, how the EPA thinks about the use of its voice as a regulator is critical to the overall credibility of the EPA. On this occasion, we have concerns about the science behind some of the statements made by your chief scientist.
Ms Robertson went on to dispute Dr Rowath's publicly stated views on irrigation, the swimmability of rivers and even synthetic foods, and said at the very least Dr Rowath should be engaging with the ministry's scientists. The Associate Environment Minister Eugenie Sage also met with the EPA to discuss Dr Rowath following her comments on irrigation.
My office was being contacted by members of the public concerned about the interview with Dr Rowath.
What happened at that meeting?
The issue was raised and I understood that there was action already in train.
Right, to remove her from that position?
No, just to raise with her the concerns.
Alan Freeth was a really controversial appointment when he appointed Dr Rowath as chief scientist. Then we have all these problems with her. Do you still have confidence in Alan Freeth?
I have confidence in the integrity of the Environmental Protection Authority, and public confidence in the authority is critical.
Yeah. Do you have confidence in him?
Yes.
Dr Rowath didn't respond to a request for an interview, while Dr Freeth refused to be interviewed. From Parliament for Morning Report, Benedict Collins.
It's 6 minutes to 8. Some traffic news in Auckland. There's been a breakdown on the northern motorway. Now that's affecting the city-bound traffic. It's blocking the lane, the bus lane it is actually, just after Gravel Roads. You can expect some pretty long delays probably coming into the city from the north of Auckland this morning. Also in Wellington, there was a truck breakdown on State Highway 1 at Parramatta. That's causing issues for the southbound traffic. It's slow near the on-ramp at the Parramatta roundabout.
5 dead Hector's dolphins is what a fisherman off the coast of Banks Peninsula caught in his set nets in February this year, though he wasn't breaking any laws when he accidentally snared them. He reported the incident to MPI and Fisheries Inshore New Zealand, who in turn briefed Fisheries Minister Stuart Nash, who sat on the information for 11 days before making an announcement with Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage on Tuesday. Their announcement outlines a raft of proposed changes to fishing rules which could see set nets banned entirely. Fisheries Inshore NZ Chief Executive Jeremy Helzen says its members have already voluntarily stopped using set nets in Southland for conservation reasons. He joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
So are you completely happy with the direction that the government is now saying they're going and possibly a total ban on set nets?
Well, we're certainly very happy that the ministers have announced that they're going to review the threat management plan for Hector's dolphins. We think that's the right avenue to pursue as far as thinking about how to reduce the risk further to these dolphins.
But going as far as a total ban?
Well, I wouldn't want to preempt the outcomes of that review. Clearly, the ministers have signalled that there's a range of options on the table. So we would work through that process with government and other stakeholders and see what eventuates. But I think it's too early to say whether we'd support one outcome or any other.
Would it be problematic if that was decided to be an outcome, problematic for the industry?
Well, certainly set netting is a method that's used to take a number of inshore species. So certainly there would be a number of people affected. So we'd have to work through the fallout from that if indeed the government went that far.
I mean, big number, big impact?
I think it would be pretty big. Perhaps not in the overall scheme of the fishery, but certainly there's a lot of small owner-operators that go about their business using set nets and supply fish to local markets.
So you don't sound convinced that a total ban might be the way to go. There are bans, regional bans, if you like.
Yeah. There's a huge area of the South Island that's already closed to set netting in the key Hector's dolphin habitat. So there's already a huge amount of protection in place. We would have to be convinced through the analysis and information that's presented through the threat management plans to consider whether that's justified to go as far as a total ban.
And in the meantime, what's the industry doing to try and reduce this occurring while the government's doing what the government's doing?
Well, in the area in question, the fishermen involved in that, they've moved right out of that area. So I'm not aware that there's any set netting in that general area at the moment. We're also working with fishermen all around the South Island at the moment, putting vessel-specific risk management plans in place and working on them to reduce their risk and working with them to try and identify things that they can do better to reduce the risk to all protected species.
Jeremy Halsen, thanks very much for joining us on the program. He's the Chief Executive of Fisheries Inshore New Zealand. It's 2 to 8.
Quick look at the front pages. The New Zealand Herald is leading with progress on the bill that would bring in tougher sentences.